Hi there, my name is Dr. Jesvir Kaur Mahil, and in beginning this research, this exploration into the concepts of Azaadi, Izzat and Ghar, and looking at dynamics that either make or break homes, I began with looking at several scenarios that very often it's difficult to have articulate answers for. Scenarios, for example, extreme situations. For example, during the partition of Punjab in 1947, we know that hundreds of Sikh men killed women in their own families to save them from a fate which was deemed to be worse than death, rape, torture, or forced religious conversion. We have stories, for example, the famous story about my Bhago, who persuaded the Jali Muqti to return to the battlefield, where they had resigned and given the bidwa to Guru Gobind Singh Ji to say that they were no longer his disciples. And the reason they did that is because Anandpur had been besieged for a very long time, and people were starving and relying on eating leaves and bark of the tree. And it was in those circumstances that they had resigned and gone back to their home. But my Bhago persuaded them to go back to the battlefield, even though Guru Gobind Singh's force at the time was greatly outnumbered and depleted. This was in 1704. And so questions around that, about what was it that, in terms of the Izzat and Azaadi and the concept of Ghar, that enabled the Jali Muqti to be persuaded to sacrifice their lives in that way. More contemporary issues, for example, those of us who live in the diaspora, the Sikhs in the diaspora, very often we will hear friends and family members saying, well, it's my life and I don't care what my family and community think of me. I make my own choices and decisions and I cultivate my own independent lifestyle. And sometimes it's very difficult to know the consequences of and the underlying assumptions that are inherent in statements such as that and choices such as this. We will hear things like, well, it's my family and my community and I will do whatever it takes to defend our culture, a contrast to someone wanting to be independent, in contrast, this desire to defend the boundaries of the family, to defend the boundaries of the community. And I'm sure we've all heard friends or family, or heard other people talking about life in two worlds with conflicting values, beliefs and assumptions, the life in the world of the family and the life in the world of the professional domain, different communities. And we'll hear people talking about how they survive by creating distinct identities for each context and hiding unaccepted parts of themselves from their family and their communities. So it's scenarios like this which were my starting point to begin this exploration. And I begin the exploration using the framework as an educator, using a framework that is designed simply to stimulate thought, to be thought-provoking, to stimulate discussion, because in my philosophy in terms of education is that learning takes place when conversations are sincere, when conversations are heartfelt, and when conversations are articulate. And when I talk about being articulate, it's about knowing how we interpret these various concepts without making assumptions. So, for example, we talk about a house and we talk about a home. Well, what is the difference between a house and a home? A house is tangible, it's physical, I can see a house, whereas a home is a conceptual container. It has a clear place, space, temporal, relational, and symbolic parameters. And I wear a ghara, and very often I look at my ghara as symbolic of a home. The ghara has clear boundaries. There's an inside to the ghara, which is private and personal, and there's the outside of the ghara, which is public and social. And if we look at the Ghar as symbolic of home, we can see that there are contextual boundaries of a Ghar. So a Ghar has boundaries, and within those boundaries, there are pressures, the inner drivers of Azaadi. And my interpretation of Azaadi, and of course everyone will have a slightly different interpretation of Azaadi, but this is about knowing and being clear about what our individual interpretations are. So I look at Azaadi as being inner drivers. It's that personal agency, it's that power from within to do the will of I and we, I and us being like that internal group, as opposed to Izzat being the social pressures and they in contrast to I and we. So they are, it could be others in the family who are not part of the I and we. It could be those in the community who are separate from the I and the we. And I look at home as being a concept which is not simply about the physical location where our body is. Home is also where our heart is, where our mind is, where our spirit is. And sometimes the spirit is a much more expansive conceptual realm. The mind may be in a totally different place to where we live. We may work in an entirely different place. We don't all work from home. And so if our mind is very much related to our power and prestige in the professional space, then obviously the Ghar is much broader than the physical location. So I look at Ghar in terms of those four broad areas: the Ghar for the body, the Ghar for the heart which is about relationships, about the mind, our cognitive values, our cognitive identity, values, beliefs and assumptions, culture, and our spirit, what inspires us, that essence that gives us optimism, the thing that we strive towards, the true, the good and the beautiful. And this comes from Greek philosophy. The Greek philosophers thought that the things that most people strive for are a search for truth, goodness and beauty. And so that comes from the social pressures. The society expects us to be true to purpose. They expect us to be good. They expect us to be as beautiful as we can be. And they expect us to make a valuable contribution to our family and to society. And there's an expectation for us to demonstrate altruism, because it's altruism and loyalty that glues a family together. It's altruism and loyalty that glues a community together. And in terms of these different layers of home, so a home is spatial, it's temporal, it's emotional, it's cognitive, and it's spiritual. And in terms of the home for the body, it's a physical place where we expect at the bare minimum to have safety, for our health and hygiene needs to be taken care of. It's a place where we feel that we can be nurtured, and we can we can rest in that place. So hygiene, health, safety, all of these are, I would say, bare minimum criteria that we expect in a home for our body. And then there's the home for our heart, which is an emotional space. This is where we expect to give and receive love and happiness, and to be supported, and to be protected and to be defended. And then there's the home for the mind, which is the home of our culture, our chosen culture, our identity, our chosen identity, our values, and the beliefs that we choose to adopt. And then there's the spiritual home, which is symbolic, and that's where we draw our inspiration from. That's where we feel our purpose. We feel in alignment with our purpose in life, because of this symbolic home where our spirit resides. And this inspires our mission as well, when we feel in alignment with our purpose. So a home is a place where we feel a sense of belonging. We feel a sense of belonging in place, in space, in relationships, and also in our symbolic home. Home is always seen to be a place where we return to. You know, we go out of the home, but we always come back. At the end of the day, we come back to the place where we can rest. That's in terms of the home for the body. The physical place that we call home, it's a place where we return to feel safe, to feel, that our health and our hygiene, and we can rest. We have privacy, there's ownership of our space, and we feel comfortable in our physical space, physical place for the home. And then the heart is that emotional space where we come back to. It's those relationships that we return to, where we feel the deepest love, the deepest happiness, and we feel most supported, most protected, most connected. So we can have lots and lots of different relationships, but those that we come back to again and again are the ones where we feel most at home in. And then we have the home for the mind, and this is the home for our identity, our values, beliefs, our roots, the heritage, the cultural dynamics. And this is the space that we come back to, that space of belonging where we feel most powerful in terms of making choices. We feel powerful to make decisions in our own home. We feel there's prestige, that we feel valued. Prestige is about the value. We come back to the home, we come back to the family where we feel most valued. We come back to that workspace, or that it can even be symbolic, where we feel that we are most significant and we feel most rewarded. And then there's the spiritual home, the home for our purpose, our mission, and our service in life. And we come back to this space symbolically. We come back to that symbolic purpose for our life, where we feel inspired, where we feel optimistic. In Jesvir Kaur, we feel that we're in alignment with truth, and we feel that this is the home where we can express our goodness and our beauty. And when we talk about beauty, it can be natural beauty, it can be beauty in terms of being intact, being whole, but we're not broken. So I would contrast beauty as opposed to, being broken, for example, and being frustrated. So beauty is when we feel at ease, when we are as we are the ideal self, that is the beautiful. And in my view, a home, it can be broken where we don't feel safe. So if we say that a home is supposed to be where we experience safety and health and hygiene, a place where we can rest, we have privacy, we have ownership of our own space and comfort, well, then a home is broken when we don't feel safe, we don't feel healthy or comfortable in that environment. And if the home is supposed to be a place where we experience love, happiness, support, protection, connection, in my view, a home is already broken if we don't experience love, we don't experience happiness, support, protection, or connection in that place that we call home. And if the home is supposed to be a place where we experience power, prestige, feeling significant and rewarded, well, then a home is already broken if we feel that we are powerless to choose, we are powerless to decide and to create our own lifestyle, where we feel ignored, we feel insignificant, we feel unrewarded. Our home is already broken. And if we feel depressed, if we feel pessimistic, we feel broken, we feel destructive, in my view, our spiritual home is already broken. We're disconnected from it. We're not in alignment with the home of our spirit, from which we derive purpose, inspiration, optimism, the Chardhi Kala, the truth, the goodness, the beauty. We feel disconnected from it. And so, you know, this may seem very simplistic, but, you know, we may feel depressed simply because we have broken that connection with our spirit. So in terms of the dynamics of Azaadi and Izzat, when we are thinking about making and breaking homes, well, once again, if the home of our spirit is where we feel a sense of purpose, we feel inspired, our mind feels powerful, and we feel prestige, we feel significant, we feel rewarded. In terms of the spirit, when there is inadequate Izzat, so, you know, very simplistically, it could be that there's not enough beauty, goodness, or alignment with true purpose in our life. That can lead to pessimism, betrayal, trauma, depression, because Izzat is alignment with our true purpose. Izzat is alignment with the truth, alignment with goodness, alignment with beauty, however we define it. And in terms of the mind, when there is insufficient Azaadi, because if we define Azaadi as being the inner power to be able to choose, to make decisions and to create, well, if we don't have enough power to make our own choices, to make our decisions, to create our own lifestyle, then that can lead to feeling powerless. It can lead to feeling ignored, insignificant, and unrewarded. And if we have inadequate Izzat in terms of our relationships, where there's not enough altruism being when we think about the needs of others, even if that comes at an expense to our own needs. So we sacrifice our own needs because we would rather meet the needs of others. So if there is inadequate altruism, inadequate loyalty, not enough courage, that can lead to hatred, unhappiness, abuse, attack, and isolation within our own home. So a home would be broken if we are accused of being cowardly, if we're accused of being disloyal, or being too selfish, not altruistic enough. In terms of the home for the body, well, when there is insufficient Azaadi and we don't have the power to to create our own space, which is private, where we have ownership of our personal space, well, that can threaten our safety, and that can threaten our health, our hygiene, and our comfort. So we have broken that home. So what I'm saying here is that there needs to be a harmony between Izzat and Azaadi, because if we don't have enough Azaadi, then we will feel powerless. We may feel threatened. And if we don't have enough Izzat, then we can create hatred. We can create, conditions for unhappiness of others. We can become traumatized through the betrayal of others because they don't see us as being in alignment with what they consider to be truth, goodness, and beauty. And that can lead to the trauma of betrayal, lead to depression. So it's not as though one is better than the other. What is important is that there needs to be a congruence, there needs to be harmony between Azaadi and Izzat. So in desirable homes, once again, we would say we feel at home and it's desirable, it's conducive to our growth and our achieving our potential. If we feel that our home creates conditions where we feel safe, where we experience love and happiness, we experience being powerful to make our own choices, we feel rewarded, we feel on purpose, in alignment with our purpose, and we feel the power of goodness, truth, and beauty in our lives. But if the home is undesirable, then those homes we feel depressed, pessimistic, powerless, unhappy, discomfort, feeling uncomfortable, feeling violated, feeling unsafe because the situation is dangerous. So, as I said earlier, it's about the dynamics of Azaadi and Izzat within the boundaries of the Ghar. So if we look at the contextual boundaries of a Ghar, where we have different powers, we have the internal power, the I and the we, the us, and we have the external power, they, and we have to navigate and make sense of the internal and the external. So the Azaadi could be the will of an individual or a group, those who are in alignment with our own values and beliefs, and we call them we. This is us. This is what we want. This is what's right for us. As opposed to the Izzat, which is that social power, which comes from what they want, the others. It's that code of conduct, which is meant to keep the family and the community intact, to ensure the survival, the growth, and the emancipation of the family, the community, and society. So if we look at Azaadi and Izzat in terms of those 4 levels of home, the home for the body, the home for the heart, the home for the mind, the home for the spirit, well, the Azaadi is a pressure which is searching for privacy, greater personal space, comfort and pleasure, whereas the external pressures, the external drivers, the social code of conduct, there's an expectation of hygiene and health. That's not to say that we don't want hygiene and health for ourselves. This is just a way of separating what's the Azaadi is that inner drive to seek what we want from the outside world, whereas the outside world is looking, it has its own expectations of what it needs from our inner world. The society needs us to be hygienic. Society needs us, our community, our family needs us to be healthy. So that's an expectation from the outside as well as inside. In terms of our relationships, we may wish to exert our inner drives to find relationships that we believe are supportive, are loving and happy, and the external pressure of society to keep the family and the community together is an expectation that we will be altruistic enough to protect those who are vulnerable, for example, the children, the elderly, and the sick, or those simply going through a rough patch. There's an expectation of altruism that we are capable of protecting and supporting those who are vulnerable when they can't take care of themselves. In terms of our mind, our Azaadi searches for the power, increasing power to make choices, to make decisions, to create our lifestyle, for example, or different things that we want to create in our life. But externally, the family expects what we do with our mind to add value, to make a contribution for the enhancement of the family and the community. So externally, the pressures are for us to be using our mind to add value, to contribute, to enhance not only our own lives, but the lives of the family and the community. And in terms of the spirit, Azaadi, there's a search for personal inspiration, for personal optimism, whereas Izzat is more about the shared purpose, and it's about the shared notions of what is truth, what is goodness, and what is beauty, rather than the personal notions of that. There are different approaches to how we navigate the Azaadi and the Izzat within the different parameters. And I find that there are 3 main approaches. One I call a defensive approach, one expansive approach, and the embracing approach. Now, the reason I put these as cyclical is that I think very often there can be a tendency to assume that the defensive approach is inferior to the embracing approach. But what I want to highlight here is that all of us can face situations where we will need to be defensive to defend our borders. For example, during times of atrocities, during a war, death, divorce, loss, or simply uncertainty when we move from one country to another, for example, and things are not settled. Everything is uncertain. We fear for our survival. In those cases, I believe that all of us, to some degree, we will become defensive in our approach because the situation requires us to defend our space, to defend our boundaries. And expansive is when we feel settled already. We are successful, we're thriving, we're not in a mode of like, is our survival at risk? So, you know, there we have the privilege of being more expansive and building bridges with other communities, whereas in the first case, the defensive approach, we are more focused on defending our own boundaries. In the expansive approach, we are willing to build bridges with others. And then there's the embracing approach, and this is when we are doing more than well. We are highly successful, we're flourishing, we feel powerful, we feel progressive. And, you know, so again, once again, somebody who is flourishing, who is very progressive, who is very powerful, what I'm saying here is that that's not a superior way of behaving compared with a defensive approach, because even that person who is flourishing, if they, you know, encounter themselves being suddenly at war with the neighboring, you know, neighborhood or country or community, they will revert back to a very different way of behaving compared with when everything was going very well for them. So with the defensive approach, the way of defending is either you are in or you're out. You're either part of us or you're part of them. And so there are very clear parameters around inclusion and exclusion. You know, we are included if we are part of the I and the we, and everyone outside of those parameters is a they, and the boundaries are clearly demarcated and the boundaries are clearly defended and protected. The expansive approach, on the other hand, when we feel more settled, you know, maybe the defensive approach was that of our parents as first generation immigrants into you know, a new country, but the expansive approach, the second generation of immigrants feel more settled, more successful, we're thriving in an environment, and therefore we look for the common ground between the different notions of Azaadi and Izzat that are established in our own parameters of the I and we. We look broader, we build bridges with the communities that we consider to be they, and we overlap and we integrate with them. And then, you know, perhaps by the third generation of immigration, when we are flourishing as a community, as a family, as a community, we're flourishing, we feel powerful, we're progressive. Through adaptation and assimilation, we can create new notions of Azaadi and Izzat. So the I and we, so the broader they, we embrace it and we make that a part of ourselves. We absorb, we assimilate, and we become almost identical to the broader communities. Now, in a defensive approach to Azaadi and Izzat, in a Ghar, it's either you're either in or you're out. You're either in this family and community or you're not. And there are advantages and disadvantages. There are drawbacks. If you stay in the parameters set by the family and community, you may feel powerless to choose, to make your own decisions, to create your own life. You may also feel insignificant, frustrated. You may be uncomfortable without any privacy and without ownership of your personal space. But if you leave that family, if you leave that community and you step outside the set parameters, then you may feel isolated, you may feel alienated and depressed without a clear sense of purpose. You may be left with no one to support you or defend and protect you when you're unable to take care of yourself. The expansive approach to Azaadi and Izzat within the boundaries of Ghar, it can focus on building bridges. Let's establish bridges based on shared values, beliefs, and common ground. But who are we prepared to build bridges with? At the body level, who are we willing to share food and drink and personal space with? If your family is vegetarian, are you willing to share food with those who are non-vegetarian? Are you willing, if your family doesn't drink alcohol, are you willing to share space with those who do drink alcohol? At the heart level, who do we trust to be altruistic and to remain loyal to us in times of crisis? So we may marry into communities who are, of very different cultures to ourselves. During times of crisis, would your in-laws be loyal to you during times of crisis? Would they be altruistic? Would they defend and protect you? So these are the kind of questions that come into focus when we're thinking about who do we want to build bridges with? Will they empower us? Will these bridges empower us and add value to our lives? Or will they take away our power? Will they undermine the value in our lives? And who aligns with our notions of true purpose, goodness, and beauty? If we build bridges with those who have very contrasting interpretations of what our true purpose is in life and what is considered to be good and what is considered to be beautiful, then we're building bridges with those others. Will that empower or disempower our community? So in terms of that expansive approach of integration, the question arises, well, what will the new parameters be? So we are broadening our own parameters, but where are we building bridges? What are we willing to accept? What is in alignment and won't undermine our own culture and our own survival? In terms of the embracing approach to Azaadi and Izzat Ghar, the statement could be, well, we need to adapt and assimilate in our new environment to thrive and to flourish. That's the assumption. We need to adapt and assimilate. The process of adaptation can take several generations. So this is another reason why that defensive approach, the expansive approach, the embracing approach, all of these approaches are not all available to us in different situations. For example, if we have moved from one country to another in terms of the body, in terms of adapting our physical appearance, we may start to wear different clothes, we might cut our hair in local hairstyles, but it takes time, generations, for our features to look similar to the larger community. In terms of our relationships, what we expect in a relationship, it can take generations to change those expectations about what keeps a family together, what keeps a community together. In terms of the mind, our ambitions for power, prestige, and reward may be very different based on whether we are first generation or third generation in a new country. And our notions of truth, purpose, goodness, and beauty, again, adapting to these notions of these very deeply seated core values, it can take a lot of time. It doesn't happen overnight usually. So that adaptation and assimilation is something which will probably happen naturally over time, but it does take time and it does take a lot of willingness to be embracing. So that defensive approach, for that reason, I think very often first generation migrants or situations where there is war or a divorce or other kind of dangers where there is a struggle for survival, we often take on that defensive approach in order to ensure our survival. The second generation migrants will be more expansive because roots are beginning to form in the new country, bridges are being built to integrate diverse cultures in the adopted environment, and the family and the community are thriving. And embracing would be the third generation migrants, where the roots are already established and a third culture has emerged from the synthesis of the inherited and the adopted cultures, and the family and the community are flourishing in the new environment. So let's look at some of those scenarios. Why did hundreds of Sikh men kill women in their own families to save them from a fate which was deemed to be worse than death? For example, rape, torture, or forced religious conversion during the partition of Punjab in 1947. Well, that was an extreme situation of danger where the focus was on survival. So if we look at the home for the body, the place, there was no safety. So it was a situation where there was no safety, there was no rest, there was no comfort, there was no privacy. In terms of the heart, well, there was certainly no happiness. There was very little support, and there was no protection from the police or the army. Only the family were protecting themselves. And in terms of the power, the only power that was available to people in those times of crisis when the threat was imminent was the power to choose, to decide how to die, basically. And in terms of the purpose, the shared purpose was about the alignment with truth as the family, as the community saw that shared purpose to be. So if we look at that scenario within the context of, Azaadi and Izzat, most of the ingredients of Azaadi and Izzat were no longer available. And there was, it was a situation where decisions had to be made about how to protect those who are vulnerable, the children, the elderly, the sick, and in this case, the women, how to protect them, how to demonstrate the love through altruism. So instead of a black and white judgment of what those men did, instead of it being a black and white, good, bad, evil, right, wrong thing, I think it helps to look at what was going on in a time of crisis with a conceptual framework which looks at, well, during those times of crisis, what was gone? And, for example, safety was gone, protection was gone, power and prestige were basically gone. When everything has been destroyed, then what were the very limited options that remained? What were the limited options through which those men sought to protect those who are vulnerable? And this is just a starting point for a discussion about this. This is just to disrupt that black and white argument and to think about the nuances of what was going on there, rather than thinking, well, that was just bad. Why was it bad? What other choices would we have made in those devastating circumstances? And in that scenario too, how did my Bhago persuade the Jali Mukhtar to return to the battlefield, where they all died defending Guru Gobind Singh Ji and his force, which was greatly outnumbered and depleted in 1704. So the Jali Mukhtar, they resigned, they gave the Bedwa to Guru Nanak Ji and said, we're no longer your disciples, and they wanted to go back home. They wanted to go back home because they were basically starving, under those conditions of siege. They were starving. They wanted to go back home. And But when they went back home, my Bhago and other women, they chastised them for having shown cowardice in leaving Guru Gobind Singh Ji, in not staying with fighting with courage to the death, basically. So they did bijdi. They said, you wear our bangles and we will go instead and defend Guru Gobind Singh Ji ourselves. And I think it was my Bhago, she went from village to village, persuading other women to join her. And eventually the 40 Mukte did return back to the battlefield where they were all killed. My Bhago didn't die. So in that context, in terms of Izzat, the Jali Mukte, they were compelled to demonstrate altruism and loyalty to protect those who were vulnerable. In this case, Guru Gobind Singh Ji and the force that were fighting, and they were outnumbered. They had to demonstrate loyalty. They had to do what was seen to be valuable and that made a contribution to enhance their own family and their own community. They didn't want to leave their family with this bad reputation. They didn't want their own bijdi to have a negative impact on their own family and their own community. So they were compelled to do what was required of them in terms of Izzat. And instead of personal purpose, they went in alignment of the shared purpose of the Qawm, the shared purpose of the community. So this is where, Azaadi, that personal Azaadi, in my view, was, yes, they did have the power to choose whether to stay or to go. But what I'm saying is that they would have been homeless if they had not chosen to go along with my Bhago. Their homes were all destroyed anyway. Without the Izzat, they didn't have a home. They no longer had homes where they felt loved and happy. They wouldn't have felt happy in their homes, and therefore there was no choice really except to go back and demonstrate alignment with that shared purpose. So again, this is just my superficial thinking on it, and this we could have discussions about what was really going on there in terms of Izzat and Azaadi, in terms of the gender, like what was expected of the women. It wasn't expected of the women to go along with my Bhago. That wasn't expected. That was a plus. Many women did join her, but they did that despite the expectations of society. Whereas for the men, there was no choice. That was what they were supposed to do. That was their only role, was to go back and fight. And in terms of the scenario where we hear people saying, well, it's my life and I don't care what my family and community think of me. I make my own choices and I make my own decisions and I cultivate my own independent lifestyle. In this case, I would say that the focus is obviously much more on Azaadi than Izzat, because it's about personal inspiration and optimism. It's about personal power to choose, to make decisions and to create. It's about personal love, personal happiness, personal ownership of space and comfort and pleasure. But of course, Azaadi and Izzat are interrelated. And when I highlight health and hygiene, of course, for an individual, health and hygiene are important, but in terms of Izzat, that is what is expected of that individual, that regardless of their power to choose and to make decisions, those choices have to be healthy choices. Those choices have to be hygienic choices. So, for example, if somebody says, well, it's my life and I can choose to do drugs if I want to do drugs, well, Izzat would be, well, that's not a hygienic choice. Addictions, arguably, if somebody is addicted, they are no longer freely making a choice about that anyway. But nevertheless, society expects that individual to be living their life and making choices that support their own health and hygiene at the very least. But in terms of Izzat, somebody who makes a statement like that, they are seen to be disloyal. They can't be relied on to defend or to protect family members who are vulnerable. They won't be around to protect family members who are sick, those who are the children, the elderly, those who are going through a rough time. So there is no, that expectation of support is no longer there. And in terms of Izzat, that person is not contributing or adding value to enhancement of family and community. They might be enhancing their own lives in isolation, but not the life of the family, not the life of the community. And they don't have a shared purpose, and there isn't that shared concept of truth, goodness, and beauty. Of course, the individual may say, well, they have their own interpretation of what is good, what is beautiful, and what is truth, but that's an isolated, it's not a shared concept that adds value to others, only to their own lives and those who they wish to include within the parameters of their own Azaadi, their own space. In terms of the scenario, well, it's my family and my community, and I will do whatever it takes to defend our culture. So this is in contrast to scenario 3, where the person is focused on the individual. Here, the person is focused on the collective. And here, there's more of a leaning towards Izzat rather than Azaadi. The focus is more on the shared purpose, the shared truth, goodness, and beauty, and adding value and contribution to the family and to the community, and being altruistic and being loyal and being there to protect those who are vulnerable. So again, this is not right or wrong, but this is like the focus here is on Izzat, whereas the focus of the scenario 3 was on Azaadi. And another scenario, I live in two worlds with conflicting values, beliefs, and assumptions, and I survive by creating distinct identities for each context and hiding unaccepted parts of myself from my family and my communities. So here, we could argue that there are two distinct worlds where the Azaadi and Izzat is being navigated in a different way in each of the two worlds. And I suppose that this is the scenario that a lot of Sikhs in the diaspora are currently in the contemporary society struggling with, how to live in the two worlds, how to merge those two worlds where there aren't conflicting values, where we don't have to hide aspects of ourselves in the different environments, where we can go to work and bring the whole of ourselves to work rather than hiding those parts which are not acceptable to the other community, to the home, and vice versa, not hiding what is our professional identity within the home. So this is an area that we need to have more discussions about, and this is an ongoing iterative conversation. So if you would like to take part in this discussion, looking at these scenarios, you might have very different points of view, perspectives to myself. These are just raw ideas at the moment. Then please contact me and let's continue the discussions. Thank you.